to a conversation with Mildred Howard. My name is Mark White, Executive Director of the New Mexico Museum of Art, and this is, of course, Mildred Howard, one of our featured artists in the exhibition Poetic Justice, Judith F. Baca, Mildred Howard, and John Quick-to-See Smith. Prior to our conversation with Mildred, I want to make a couple of announcements, and hopefully these are all things that you might be able to attend. As part of our collaboration with Site Santa Fe and the Poetic Justice Billboard Project, Hakeem Bellamy, one of the poets of the museum, the Museum of Art commissioned for the Poetic Justice exhibition, will be reading as part of the chatter performance at Site Santa Fe next Saturday, February 12th. Chatter's programming weaves together traditional and contemporary chamber music and includes a reading by a poet of the morning. You can purchase tickets on the Site Santa Fe website. So if you want to attend the program with Hakeem Bellamy, please do go to the Site Santa Fe website. Our collaboration with the Poets for Poetic Justice has been a really fantastic experience. And so I highly encourage you to do that. On February 17th, we will have at 6 o'clock Mountain Time, we will have the next in the series of talks, conversations that we're having with the artists from Poetic Justice. Join artist Judy Baca and Mary Scully, curator of the Poetic Justice exhibition, for a conversation about the history of the Great Wall of Los Angeles and the plans to expand that project. That program, like this one, will be virtual, so please look for the Zoom registration, which will be on our website soon if it isn't already. And finally, not to be missed, please save the date of Saturday, May 28th for a symposium with all three artists from the Poetic Justice exhibition, Judy Baca, Mildred Howard, and John Quick-to-See Smith, in conversation at the New Mexico Museum of Art's St. Francis Auditorium. The program will be followed by a free family day of programming at the Museum of Art. So three great programs, all of which relate to Poetic Justice for you to look forward to, and I highly encourage you to attend if you can possibly make it. All right, without further ado, why don't we begin our conversation with Mildred Howard. Mildred, it's so fabulous to be here in your studio in Oakland, California. Mildred and I have spent part of the day together, and we've been greatly looking forward to talking about her career, her involvement with Poetic Justice. So we really do thank you for tuning in. This is, I think, going to be a fantastic program. So thank you, Mildred.
Thank you.
All right, so I thought we would start with a pretty basic question. For those of our audience that may not know much about your background, could you tell us how you came to be an artist?
Yeah, I started off early in my life as a dancer, but at the same time, I was always curious and interested in making things. I would walk maybe 3 doors from my house to a community church that had arts and craft classes. And by the time I entered elementary school, I was enameling and doing various other kinds of sort of arts and crafts. But at the time, that was just something that I did. I didn't think about it as a child, oh, I'm going to do this as a profession. But in retrospect, I've always been curious about the world and questioning things as to why this or what if. My parents were antique dealers, so there were always fragments of furniture and other kinds of things that I would use to put together. My father would whittle carvings for missing parts of the furniture. And so I was exposed to all of this way before I even started school. And as I continued throughout my life, so almost simultaneously, I was dancing, making art, studying fashion, all of those things at once. And it wasn't until the late 60s when I entered a street fair, I just put something up and I'm thinking, oh, people actually are interested in this. But then, like many women who are my age, the 60s was a big turning point. You know, I got married, I had kids, I got divorced. I was designing clothes and dancing and making art on the side. And then one day, in the mid 70s, I think it was, I was walking down the street and into this place called Fiberworks Center for the Textile Arts. And I walked into Fiberworks, and there was a woman named Maria Vella. And my kids were with me, and they were playing outside, and it didn't bother her that they were laughing and playing. And we spent about an hour, and she said, I have a job for you. And that job was the reason why I'm now making art professionally, because that set off a whole new career. And that was the beginning of my professional art career.
So just a brief follow-up question on the influence of your parents. Would you say that the antique store that your parents ran, did that give you kind of an interest in working with collage and assemblage? Because I know a lot of what they passed down to you appears in various works.
Oh, most definitely. I have to step back. My father had a small crucible in the backyard, and I would watch him put things together. And my mother would mix the stains for the furniture. And she also taught art during the WPA in Galveston, Texas. So it was a natural for me to end up doing this. It was just, it was available. And I had free reign of all these things. And I thought everyone had that. I can remember asking her question after question after question. And finally, she would just stop and she would give me something to occupy my mind.
Go play.
Well, why? And she would go on and on and on.
We're going to come back to the subject of your parents in one of the other questions, but I want to move on and switch over to the attention that you've received for these public installations, your houses. They're large scaled installations composed of wood and metal frames and usually made of some form of glass. In this case, as what you see on the screen in Clear Story, glass bottles, but not always. Sometimes it's panes of glass, sometimes it's mirrors. Initially, you used bottles, but you included other forms of glass. Why was the house form in particular so compelling as the form that you would use? And why did you select glass very early on as one of your primary media?
I think this might have been my third or fourth house that I did. And I initially did houses based on a reading that I did by James Weldon Johnson called The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. And what he did is that in this book, he said that there was a section that talked about putting bottles in the ground, neck down. And he thought that the bottles grew as the flowers did. And so that really fascinated me. And as a child, a curious child, and now a curious adult, I can understand a child asking a question like that. And for the next thing I know, I'm doing a bottle house. And that first bottle house was 4,000. This bottle house, shaped like an M, I think it's between 92 and 97,000 bottles, ranging in size from about 1.5 inches to a regular large wine bottle. And they're all clear because I had never done a clear bottle house. But then you begin to question, what is clear? Is it really clear? When you look through the bottles to the other side, you see other bottles, but in between that, you see reflection and refraction. You see the image, what's in between. So, and it's shaped in the size of an M, because that was to be my last bottle house. And if you notice on the screen, there's a room inside of a room, and the crossbar at the rear is a part of the H. And this was commissioned by the Palo Alto Art Center. It eventually went to New Orleans. And unfortunately, this one, because of the storms, did not withstand. So it's no longer, and it's good to see this.
So I'm sure I'm anticipating some of the questions we're going to get from the audience, but how much help did you have in putting something like this together?
Well, this one, I had help. But initially, I had intermittent help of a little bit. The first one is which is at the DeRosa Art Center in Napa, California, which Napa is part of the wine country, and it was bought by Rene DeRosa. I did that one at Headland Center for the Arts in Sausalito, and Headlands took over an old Army barracks and made it an art center. It was on the 3rd floor. Every bottle weighs about 1.25 pounds. So if you can imagine lifting bottles 4 times and then taking them 4,000, each weighing 1.5 pounds, and climbing three floors with the bottles because they didn't have an elevator. What that's like. I mean, I was a raving maniac by the time I finished and wondered, why did I do this? Why did I? But at the end, this sent me on a really great journey on bottles and the meaning of bottles. And I learned as much from the viewer or the spectators as I did in making the bottles. And I remember I found out that empty bottles meant dead soldiers. Someone came and said that. And here I am in a Army barracks from, I guess, maybe World War II, and building a bottle house. So that was something that I didn't know. And the good thing about art is you find out a lot about the material and ways of working that help inform you and hopefully push the work forward.
I've been at that house with you at the DeRosa, and it's really pretty amazing. It's strikingly different from this one because you have all manner of bottles in that one, different colors, different shapes and sizes, and it has a randomness, an eclectic feeling that is actually, quite remarkable, especially when you're inside of it, because obviously as the light penetrates the various surfaces, you get this sort of kaleidoscopic quality. And so you're kind of really aware of the space. What drew you to the house form?
I don't know what drew me from the house form. It's just that I've always been interested in architecture, but not in the sense as an architect, but for me, the house is a vessel. It's a vessel of information and contains stories. It's a safe place. There are all these metaphors that I see coming out of a house. And as a result, I just wanted to explore how I could do something in a creative way that would help others to think about what is home.
Well, and that's really, I think, important because it's a universal concept. I mean, we might all have different meanings that we bring to what is home. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's a physical structure, sometimes it's not a physical structure. If you're homeless, home might be a tent, it might be something else, but you still have certain attachments, certain emotions that you bring to that space.
Not only about home, but also looking at the physics of light and shadow, refraction, reflection, all of those kinds of things play an important part in how I see things. What happens if the angle of light hits a bottle in a certain way? Will you see a spectrum? Will the light bounce off of that and hit something else? So there are those kinds of things that I see in doing these houses that intrigue me. And that comes out of my work at the Exploratorium, where I was responsible for integrating art and science into a program called the Institute of Inquiry. And we work with elementary school teachers to teach the physics of light and color, shadow, and those kinds of things, structure and scale.
Yeah, that's an aspect of your work that doesn't always get a lot of attention in the critical literature, just how thoughtful you are about science in a lot of your work.
Well, I didn't know that until I started working at the Exploratorium either, but I realized in that whole period of my life of working there that scientists ask questions, and one question can lead you to another, and you go on and on. And if you don't, in the words of David Ireland, the artist David, if you don't take a step, then nothing will happen. So you have to at least try. And I think the Exploratorium opened those avenues of exploration for me.
Well, let's move on to
I love this piece. I absolutely, this is one of my favorite pieces.
So this is That Dog Express from 2021, which is included in the Poetic Justice exhibition. It's actually the premiere of this piece. You, of course, know that I was very interested in including this piece in the exhibition that we did of your work in Oklahoma in 2017. Right. And unfortunately, that was not meant to be. So you've been thinking about this for a couple of years now. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about...
More like probably 10 years. Like 10 years. Yeah, I started acquiring a friend of mine, Zolita Vela, in New York. I told her I had started collecting safe deposit boxes. And she was able to locate safety boxes for me, and I found some. And what happened is that I just had all these safe deposit boxes. And then I got a call from another artist, Paul Koss, a conceptual artist, and said, this train store is going out of, model train store is going out of business. You should get down there and get your model train. So I had all of these components and had not put them together because oftentimes things are milling around in my head and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to make this work? And I have two grandsons, and I really love Snoop Dogg because I think that he is all the way Black and he's unapologetically. And he's so interesting how he's transformed himself into this person who's known all over the world. And he's really involved in the community. So this originally was going to be named after Snoop Dogg. But then Snoop Dogg's name, of course, is copyright. So that's where it came to the dog. And it goes back to my interest in the communities from which I come. And across the United States, communities such as mine are interrupted by, at one time it was called urban renewal or gentrification or whatever the terminology might be of the day. And so the city is divided. And what happens in these communities? Out of these communities come people like Snoop Dogg and a bunch of the rappers and hip hoppers of the day. So on each car, I have the name of a community. Washington, D.C., Philly, Harlem, South Berkeley, where I grew up, Leimert Park, Los Angeles, and I go on and talk about all of these communities. And these are because I think in these communities, there is a lot of treasure. And so the safe deposit boxes represent those communities.
So your family actually has a long history with public transportation.
Yes.
A lot of your brothers drove city buses.
Right.
But your mother also was pretty successful in getting the BART system to reroute at one point.
Oh, yes. Well, we had passed a bond in Berkeley that the city would not be divided. At one time, Berkeley was redlined. African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinas could not buy property above a certain street. And in Berkeley, at the time, it was called Grove Street. It's now called Martin Luther King Street. And so BART decided to go above ground in South Berkeley. And she said, oh no, this is not going to happen. We're not going to have a Berlin Wall in Berkeley. So she went to I think he was a congressman at the time or a council member, Ronald Dellums, who was our congressman. And she went to him. He joined the team. She found a lawyer, Matthew Weinberg, who just recently passed away. That was one of his first big trials. And she stopped BART for 9 months in Berkeley. And as a result, it's border to border. She said, no Berlin Wall. And so there's a film about that called Welcome to the Neighborhood that explores that whole process of what happens to a community and her contributions to that. So I grew up with that kind of social activism at the time. I mean, it was just a part of who I was, whether it was promoting unions for better pay or trying to get more people, the right kind of people in the council so that it would represent the whole community and not just part of the community.
Yeah. Well, and that appears a lot in your work, not only in this piece, but in others. I said we would, hold on a sec. There we go. I said we would keep talking about your parents through a couple of the other questions. Mm-hmm. So these are also objects that are in the Poetic Justice exhibition. They come from 2 different series. In this case, Millennials XYZ, and this one is number 14, but also I've Been a Witness to This Game, number 1 from 2016. You've received a lot of attention for both of these series for a variety of reasons. And what I find so compelling about these series is their juxtaposition of both the millennial generation and celebrities with historical imagery. In the case of the millennials, these are pages from historic African-American newspapers. On the right with Beyonce, you've got her actually juxtaposed with a page from Harper's Weekly from 1865, I believe. This is the wife and daughter of the governor of South Carolina looking over the South Carolina militia just prior to the Civil War. And so this is a really fascinating juxtaposition. And I think, actually, given the fact that this is Black History Month, these works in particular have a really interesting take on Black history. So I wonder if you might talk about your interest in these series and how you've combined the historical with the contemporary.
Well, the Black newspapers that I received, actually, I had them for about 40 years before I decided to use them. It goes back to my parents. My mother one day said, I have something that you might be interested in. And she had probably a stack, maybe a foot high, of this Black newspaper called the Los Angeles, is it the Los Angeles Times? Tribune. And at one time, this was the only way African was the main way African Americans got their news. It wasn't, we didn't have computers where you would pull it up and just find out something almost immediately. It was not only was it just, it was world news. And on this image with the young male, here is Lena Horne in the image. And what I like about that generation is that it reminds me of the 60s. It reminds me of some of the redlining that would happen, and also the communities that,
That's all right.
the communities that were able to get this information.
Oops.
Here we go. We'll come, there we go. Yeah, and if you look at these, if this, the date on the one you're looking, I think it was 1943, before I was born. But if you took away some of that, it could be today. The whole Me Too movement, the whole Trayvon Martin. And it's something really interesting about how these young people dress today. And that reminds me of the 60s. The Beyonce one, she received so much flack for her outfit that she wore at the Super Bowl. But when Michael Jackson wore a similar outfit, nothing happens. And her crossing over that red line is saying, I'm not going to take this. I'm going to do what I want and move on. So, and what she's done for, they've given away so much money to various communities. I just think it's wonderful. I mean, it's amazing what they've done. Yes, they've made a lot of money, and right on to them for doing it, because they've also shared it with the world. The young guy on the newsprint, he's like truly, he was a student of mine. One of his parents is from, I think, West Africa, the other from the Caribbean. And he was living, and I think he was born in Canada, but living in either Iowa or Ohio. And I'm thinking, what a great story. And he was an excellent student, a really excellent student.
Well, one of the things that you told me about the Millennial series is that you wanted to explore the sort of continuity of progress in some ways, that you were looking at how a previous generation had changed society, and then how this new generation was changing society, and to kind of suggest that there was a similarity between them. That successive generations, millennials, and then the XYZ generations, right, that they were all going to kind of contribute to that sort of overall sense of progress. What made you interested in sort of juxtaposing the different generations?
Well, I also wanted them to know that, especially when it comes to the whole hip hop movement, that they have a whole movement that preceded them, and that it's important to understand that so that they know how to deal with today and not make mistakes that perhaps we made. They can take what we have done in the 60s and the 70s and even before and move forward. I mean, the whole spoken word movement and the whole hip hop movement comes out of a generation of musicians who have used this style, but in different ways. So that's another reason why I did this series.
Yeah, hip hop didn't come out of a vacuum.
No. I mean, we have, John Hendricks. I mean, you can even go be King Pleasure. Um, Even to some extent, Ella Fitzgerald.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, scat
yeah,
singing is
scatting is sort of a predecessor to that.
yeah. Well, Poetic Justice is a pretty important and timely exhibition. It is, I think, something we were very fortunate to be able to organize, working with you, with Judy, with Jean. From a personal standpoint, I was really excited to see not only the resolution of That Dog Express, but which also I should tell you is my son's favorite work in the exhibition. Absolutely loves it, but we've talked about that.
Yeah.
But I also was really happy to see the opportunity for you to realize this installation. This is an installation, The Time and Space of Now, that you've been thinking about also for a while. And you worked closely with Mary Scully to make sure that this installation would be a really important part of your portion of the Poetic Justice exhibition. How did this project come into being? Let's start there.
Okay, in 2007, the curator, Lizetta LaFall Collins, said, "I'd like for you to submit a proposal to the Venice Biennale." And I was like thrilled. And of course, I didn't get it, but I learned early on, just because something doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that it's not a good idea. It's just that it didn't happen. And I had been milling this and working it and reworking it in my head since 2007. And when I was approached by Mark to do this show with Judy Baca and John Quick-to-See Smith, first of all, I'm just honored to be with these two women who have been in the forefront of social justice before there was a term social justice. Anyway, I thought this was a good idea to do this installation about the time and space of now, because time and space are, to me, the same. They're one. Without one, there is no other. So exploring what that means in relationship to the movement of people. And that's how I came about to do this piece, because I wanted, and the other thing is I found a film, a whole box of 8mm, not Super 8, that I had shot when I was 14. And I wanted to incorporate that into this piece. And I knew that I wanted to move from one room to the other, exploring this whole idea about time and space.
So one of the inspirations behind this is a family vacation that your family took to Galveston.
Right. I was 14.
You were 14, and you documented parts of that on 8mm.
Right.
And so there are various aspects of this installation that sort of act as metaphors for the memories, the experiences that you had during that family vacation. And so for those that have not necessarily seen this installation in person, you walk through a darkened space with these various sites. On the left side of the screen, you see the first area that you come into with a large black bird above, and below oyster shells. And I don't want to ask you to fully explain every element here, but if there's anything you want to interject.
Well, that was the first time I had gone to the South, and I had relatives. We went to the Gulf, and you could just go pick up oysters, put them in buckets, and take them home. And the whole thing about an oyster, how it develops and how it becomes a pearl, is inside of that. So I began to relate that to the people of that community. It was a small community where the beach that I went to was actually in a place, it was in Madagascar, and it's right on the Gulf. My family lives in a small town called Van Vleck. We had gone to Galveston and then came back to Madagascar. And we were walking along that beach, and I met relatives that were, that were born maybe 20, 30 years after Emancipation Proclamation. And that's where the black bird came in, because the bird is a symbol for me for freedom. And then the sand, the black sand, I think that represents not only time and space, but it also represents the people. And then, with sand, use sand to make glass. And as you walk through this space, I work with the composer Chris Brown, and each room has a different sound that was particularly composed for the space. And after you've walked through the bird with the warshy shells, the funnel with the sand, you come into this mirrored clock that shows the reflection on the floor. And it's at 6:19 because in Texas, it represents June 19th. So that's why I turned it to 6:19. And actually, this experience is not just about African Americans. It's about, yes, it is about that, but it's also about the American experience. It's about that the stories are the history that opened it up until recently you became aware, or one became aware of it. And then in the last room is the film. And this is an excerpt of, this is sort of a film of walking on the beach. And this part was shot actually in Alameda, California, on the beach.
But it's still autobiographical.
Yes, it is. It's somewhat autobiographical, but it's also more, it's autobiographical, I guess, because I did it. But it could be a number of stories for so many different people who want to come to this country. I just think about now on the borders of the United States from Mexico, what's happening with the children. They've almost, you don't hear anything about the kids coming from Mexico who don't have parents. It's not much different than what happened to African Americans who crossed in the Middle Passage. It's sort of the 21st century version of that. And then the Haitians who were coming out of the water and getting whipped by these men on horses. And I'm thinking, history is repeating itself. And it goes back to looking at my millennial series and hoping that someone sees this and makes a difference.
So one of the interesting things about this segment of the installation is the sort of fictional dialogue between two of your friends. Yes,
Dewey Crumpler and Oliver Jackson are two incredible artists. And this is totally unscripted. They had not seen any of the footage. And I said, I'd like to take you into a sound room and talk about time and space. And that's exactly what they did. And then I did work with, I'm not a filmmaker, I just make films, but I worked with a filmmaker, Pam Uzel, to edit the film and help me put it together so that it overlaid not only with their dialogue, but also with the sound by Chris Brown. And with Chris, I said, I want you to monk it out, as in Thelonious Monk. And he did that.
Well, and it sounds like they're actually having a conversation, but they were actually speaking completely independently of each other.
Exactly.
But the way that you have edited it all together, it really does feel as though there is this ongoing dialogue in sort of the Platonic philosophical sense about the nature of space and time.
Right, right. And there are parts in there, you're always in the now. I can hear Oliver's voice saying you're always in the now, because the minute something happens, you're in the now. Or Dewey Crumpler talking about sort of the gray space of time. But there really is no gray space. Time is moving on and on. The minute you say it, it's not there. And he even quotes Sun Ra in part of this.
Speaking of another sort of precedent for hip hop because of his improvisational
right.
nature. What I really like about this installation, and I think what it really adds to the exhibition Poetic Justice, is the way in which memory is presented as something that is almost kind of disassociated from space-time, and yet it makes up our understanding of space-time, which sounds like a paradox, but in a way, I guess perhaps it is. And it really does then give us, I think, as viewers, something interesting to think about in the way that both Judy and Jean also depict memory in their works. Memory is not necessarily identified as one of the major themes of this exhibition, but it is present in almost all of the works. And I think that that's what makes this sort of a nice, cohesive examination of the various issues that you three have all dealt with for much of your career.
Yeah, we've, I think this is I've known Judy Baca for many years, and but it's the first time the three of, and John Quick to see, but it's the first time we've all had a show together. We've sat on panels together and participated in symposiums, but to show our work is just really an honor.
Well, I can say that the exhibit is really successful, and we've gotten such a good reception for it. And a large part of that is due, in fact, to you, as well as the other two. Well, we have a couple of comments in the chat. No question and answer yet, but if you have a question for Mildred, please put it in the Q&A, and we would be happy to field those. Chris Nail, our head of education, has mentioned that even if you have not been able to actually see the exhibition in person, we do have a virtual tour of Poetic Justice available on our website, and he placed the link into the chat. So if you're really curious about the exhibition and you would like to see more, please do visit that link. Are there any questions for Mildred?
Don't be shy.
So what is the significance of the M and the H in the Clear Story house?
Mildred Howard. That's a simple one. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted, after I'd done so many, I wanted to do one with my initials. I just saw the challenge. How will you make an M and an H into a house? Oh, also, I had just been evicted because the landlord wanted to go up on my rent from my place in Berkeley. It was shortly after that. That's another reason why I wanted to do it.
So we've got another short question, or a short answer question. Has Snoop Dogg purchased the train?
No, but maybe he will. I don't know. No, he has. I don't think he even knows that I did it and how much I really appreciate what he's done for the community.
Well, the other question that we had is, what are you working on now?
Right now, I'm working on several big public art pieces. One, I'm scaling up African currency to 14, 16, and 18 feet that will go in the Hunters Point community of San Francisco, and it's going to be out of bronze. I'm also working on a different piece of African currency for the Ashby Bard Station, which is a tribute to my mother.
Oh, that's great.
Yes.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention that not only will you be represented in Santa Fe by Poetic Justice, but you'll be having a show at the Turner Carroll Gallery on Canyon Road.
Exactly. That will open on May 6th of this year.
All right.
So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. So hopefully you'll come to see us quite a bit in May, not just for the symposium, but also for the opening at the Turner Carroll.
Right.
We have one other question. How would you like your art to be remembered?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that. What I hope that people will see in my work is their own story, or be able to question the status quo, or what's perceived to be the status quo, and begin to see the world in a different light. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I want them to be able to look at the work and develop their own story, or find something perhaps that they didn't know or understand. I'd like for those who view my work to have some kind of emotional, it will provide some kind of emotional impact.
So one other question, what advice do you have for artists, especially women of color?
When I think about, when you say people of color or race, race is a social construct, it's made up. But if you don't see color, then you don't see me. What I would say for artists is to work really hard and continue to, I say this over and over, that being an artist is not learning how to type or to use a computer. It's something that's ongoing. To be extremely critical of your work, because I am. Every time I do a piece, I'm thinking, okay, how can I make this better? How can I make this more informative? What do I need to do to improve my approach to making art? So my idea is to learn as much as you can, to see as much art as you possibly can, and bring someone else along with you on this journey.
All right, well said. Are there any other questions? Well, apart from the accolades that we're seeing coming through and people wishing you well and expressing their admiration for you, I think maybe we're done. So I think, oh, those are some sweet comments.
Yes.
So thank you, everyone. We greatly appreciate you tuning in tonight to our conversation. I hope you learned a lot. I know I did. I've known Mildred for a couple of years, but I'm always inspired by her and what she has to say. So hopefully you had the same experience tonight. And we look forward to welcoming you to Santa Fe in May. On May 28th. Don't forget, we'll be having a symposium with Mildred, Judy Baca, and John Quick-to-See Smith. It's going to be a fabulous time. Do not miss it. So thank you, Mildred. It's been a pleasure tonight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.